Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from December 16th, 2022, and I'm recording this on June 16th, 2023. As always, I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually most relevant because the market is always moving and changing. And as always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. Each week they put out a list of 10 books. Each of them put out a separate list of 10 books that are of books that are trending in the market, that are in lots of sales, going up in price, that people are chasing in that moment. And we take this opportunity to look back at those books 6 months later and see how they've continued to perform in the market. And see if they were books that were worth chasing in that moment or if you'd been better off coming back later. And just see what we can learn about the patterns associated with those books. This week we got 18 books to talk about. And as we dig into this, you're going to see this is a very odd kind of week compared to most weeks that we have. Where most weeks is definitely patience paid off. This week, patience wouldn't have hurt you, but it didn't necessarily help you a whole lot either. But let's dig in and see what we can learn. First up, we have The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born, #1 from 2007. This basically hit the list because there were news that they tried a movie series with this. It didn't really work, but they were going to come back with a TV series plus movies, was what they were talking about, Intrepid Pictures. Anyway, it caused this book to hit the list. $5 average sales back then, and 9.8 only went for $86. So this book was one of those Tom puts on the list that's selling really well, but not really, going for a whole lot. This was kind of a whatever in terms of, $5, okay. And now it's still a $1 to $10 book. 9.8s are down a little bit, 50, but there's only a couple sales there. So we call this a steady and I'll be back. It wouldn't. You'd be just as well off being patient on it as you would have buying it then. So it's pretty steady, but definitely an I'll be back in terms of you could do better right now probably. Even if only slightly. Next, we have The Destroyer, #1. This is the first series for Remo Williams in comics. This was a TV announcement of maybe we were going to get this show again, or we're going to get a show related to this character. Another one that was lots of sales, but still only going for $5, 9.870, and it's still going for $5. So another kind of steady, I'll be back. I can't really put worth it on these because it's going to be pretty hard to sell it right now. You're definitely not going to make anything. So yeah, it's probably just an I'll be back. You've been just as well coming back to it later. All right. So those are our two option books. Next up, we have several covers. Our first cover is Dark Ride #3, the Tony Flex 1 in 25. This was a 1 in 25 going for 40 to 50 back then, so just not quite between ratio and double ratio, which usually means it ends up around ratio, and that's what's going on here. It's a $15 to $40 book now, so you're like, oh, that's a pretty good range, but most of the sales are in that $25, right around $25. 9.8 only went for $80. That's only one sale though, so it's hard to judge too much off of that. But yeah, we're going to call this a trap. I realize the range goes right up to where it was before, but the vast majority of the sales are in a price that would make it a trap, so that's what we're calling this. Next, we have Eternal Descent, #2, the Joseph Michael Lisner 1 in 10. This 1 in 10 was going for 15 to 20, so not even double ratio. This one's interesting in the fact that there's only been one sale. It went for 30, so based on that, it's up or worth it, for sure worth it, probably. And it's not, there's a whole bunch out there just sitting listed that aren't selling. There's only one other listed. It's listed at 80, which I don't think it'll ever sell for. So there's not many of them out there. So yeah, I would probably call this steady and worth it. I wouldn't call it up. It's, it's so hard to judge based on one sale. But yeah, it's definitely a book that doesn't appear to be found very often, although it's not really selling necessarily when it is found. So we'll see what happens with this one. But yeah, I would call this steady and worth it to this point. Next, we have The Mandalorian, #6, the Raza 1 in 50. This 1 in 50 was going for 50 to 60, so it's going right at ratio, which means it's really not that hot. That's going to end up being most likely a trap. Now it's a $20 to $50 book, so the low-end sales are definitely a trap, but most of the sales are kind of that $35, $40 range, or close enough to the 50 that we're only going to call this an I'll be back overall. 9.8, 135 to 140 on just a few sales. But yeah, it's definitely down, but it's borderline trap, but probably more in the I'll be back range is where we're putting this one. Just because of where the majority of the sales are at. Next, we have Batman Spawn #1 from 2022. The Greg Capullo, Todd McFarlane, I said Mike, Todd McFarlane Barnes & Noble exclusive variant. This was going for $25 to $30 back then. Now it's $15 to $40. 9.8, 65 to 100. Now, while it's 15 to 40, most of the sales are on the lower end here, or 15, 20, 25 on that lower end of where this was, with just a few sales kind of toward the upper. So another one we're going to call Steady, I'll Be Back. You can definitely get back into this book for a little bit less if you were patient, but you just kind of have to work through the sales a little bit. All right, second to last cover is Joker, The Man Who Stopped Laughing, #3, the Lee Bermejo variant, Joker Santa Claus. This was on the list last week at 10 to 20. By this point, it was up to 25 to 30. Now it's 5 to 40. And this is really all through that range. Really hard to judge this one in terms of exactly what it is. We're calling it Steady, I'll Be Back because there's definitely sales under that $25 range for, really nice copies. But there's also sales through the $25, $30 range with just a couple above. So we're going to call this another Steady and I'll Be Back. And you see kind of a pattern here. We've already had 5 Steady books this week. Partially because the books weren't going for that much to begin with, and partially because they've just kind of sales are a little all over the place on some of these. It's a pattern that's mostly going to continue, but not for a little bit. Next, we have Catwoman #82. This is an early Harley Quinn appearance. It's a fairly hard to find book. This was getting toward the end of the Catwoman run. The print run was getting fairly low. It's kind of a cool cover. So there's a couple of factors going on here. Back then, raw copies kind of out of nowhere were going for 20 plus. Not sure exactly why people were chasing this book. But now it's a $1 to $10 book with most of the sales 5 or less. Yeah, this is a dumpster fire. If you paid $20, $25 for this thing, and now it's a $5 book. I thought it might be an I'll Be Back just because of early Harley, but no, it has not sustained any of that here, and definitely a book that would have been way worth being patient for because it is a dumpster fire. Next, we have one Star Wars book, and that is Star Wars Life Day #1. This is the first appearance of the Wookiee Jedi Buriaga, who was part of the High Republic stuff. Rumors are we're going to get him in The Acolyte. So that was why, which is the TV show coming. So that's why this book hit the list. Raw copies back then were going for $8, 9.8 going for $50. Now raw copies are going for $1 to $15. So another one not going for a whole lot back then, going for basically the same range now. So we call this Steady and I'll Be Back. Are there a few sales that are higher? Yes, but yeah, you can definitely get this for, around cover price. Definitely a book that's been worth being patient for, even if it's steady. All right, with that, we're going to move into a bunch of books that would make you, after the first couple, would make you think, hey, I just watched this movie, and that's because the trailer hit. But first up, before we get to those, Sony had made some additional announcements back then related to their Spider movies. And we have Spectacular Spider-Man #24, the first appearance of Hypno Hustler. Yes, if you remember, this hit the list because Sony was going to make Hypno Hustler his own movie. Rumors of Donald Glover being attached, all kinds of stuff going on back then. And at that point, I made a comment about that just feels like Sony's trying to troll Marvel because they still have the rights. But it caused copies of this book to jump to 35 to 100 plus for raw side, 9.8 going for $270. Now it's a $5 to $30 book on the raw side. 9.8, $250, but only one sale. So yeah, that one hard to judge necessarily on the 9.8 side, but on the raw side, this is a dumpster fire. I called it a trap back then, but I was not harsh enough. This is a dumpster fire. They're pitching this book, and I have a hard time believing they'll actually make this into a movie, but who knows. Next, we have Amazing Spider-Man #258. So this is when we're starting to move into books related to Across the Spider-Verse, which we just seen. So the 6-month thing here worked out almost perfectly. So we can even see trailer versus movie. Where does the books go? Well, we have Amazing Spider-Man #258, the first appearance of Bombastic Bagman. And we did, if you didn't blink, we did get Bombastic Bagman in Across the Spider-Verse just for a moment, which is what kind of figured all these were going to be. A lot of these were going to be. Back then it was a $30 to $40 book. Now it's a $5 to $25 book. Back then a 9.8 went for almost $400. Now 9.8 goes for $2. This is a dumpster fire. And it absolutely is. I don't know anybody who thought Bombastic Bagman was going to be a key part of a Spider-Verse movie, but yeah. I will say this book does have a little bit of another key. It is also the book where Pete learns that the symbiote is an alien and is alive. So I'm surprised that doesn't drive this book a little higher. But yeah, this is just where this book sits. And Bombastic Bagman is not going to carry it anytime soon. Next, we have Spider-Geddon number 9, the first appearance of Spider-Cop. Another character that was obviously just going to appear in the background. And people were paying $15 to $20 for this thing. And now it's a $4 to $15 book. We're calling it a trap because there are still some sales. Several sales, 10 to 15, but yeah, this is another one that's borderline, you can almost call it dumpster fire. Who really thought this was going to be a character that would play a big role? Never understood chasing a book like this that hard. Next, we have Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows, number 1 from 2015. First appearance of Annie Mae Parker, daughter of Pete and Mary Jane in this alternate universe. There was obviously... In it, you see Pete's got a kid. I believe they call her Mayday, though, and not Annie Mae. So that is technically a different version. But back then, this was still only going for $8 back then, 9.843. This was more based on the number of sales, and not necessarily value again. So another one ended up being steady and worth it just because it didn't really have anywhere to go. It's now a $3 to $10 book, 40 to 70 on a 9.8, which is actually up a little bit. That's why I called it worth it. But yeah, even though, well, they're all at this point, they're all technically different versions. Let's be real. But this one, Annie Mae is not Mayday. So yeah, so that's where we're at here. Next, we have Spider-Man India number 1, the first appearance of Indian. I cannot Peviter Prabhakar. I don't know. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. Anyway, this is a spider character that actually even appeared more than the little girl did. Was actually a part of the plot of Across the Spider-Verse. It appears going to appear again and beyond. Back then was going for 30 plus, 9.8 going for 300 plus. Now 9.8s are actually down a little bit, 275, just under that $300 range, but right in that same range. But raw copies, $60, $65. Up and worth it on this one. I didn't go straight cash because my guess is going to start dropping, and the 9.8s didn't jump at all. So that's why we went up and worth it and not straight cash here, but definitely up on the raw side. We'll see how long that lasts now that we're moving away from the movie until we get beyond. We'll see. Next, we have Spider-Geddon number 1, first appearance of PlayStation Spider-Man. Back then, this was going for $8. Another one that was selling lots of copies, but didn't really go up in value. So it's hard to really judge. 9.8 going for 80. And yeah, another character we saw, but wasn't really part of the plot, wasn't really part of the movie other than as a cameo. Now it's a $5 to $15 book, 9.8, 30 to 40. Because the 9.8s are down and there's enough of those sales, I'm calling it down and I'll be back versus like a steady and I'll be back. But definitely a book that's been worth being patient on. Next, we have the last 3 are all characters that are main parts of this movie. This Spectacular Spider-Man number 98, the first appearance of the Spot. We talked about last week, I think we talked about 99. This week we're talking about 98. This is a book that hit the list just a couple weeks ago when the movie first came out. Back then, raw copies were going 15 to 50. So hit the list just a couple weeks ago. We're looking back 6 months. We should have a good comparison. Okay, what did the spike do with the movie versus the trailer? So 15 to 50 back then, 10 to 60 right now, 300 to 500 back then for 9.8, 2 to 250 for 9.8 now. So because most of the sales are still on the raw side, I did put it steady and I'll be back. even though it's kind of through the same range. But those 9.8s are definitely turned into a trap, if not borderline dumpster, if not a dumpster fire if you paid $500 for it. And that's even with the movie just coming out and him being the main villain and going to be the villain for Beyond. So, next we have Spider-Man 2099, first appearance of Miguel O'Hara, the Spider-Man 2099, or first full, I guess. He does appear in ASM 365 kind of as a preview, but to me, this is his book. This is really where he appears. Raw copies back then were going for 20, 9.8, 180. Movie just came out. Did it jump more than it did at the trailer? And the answer is no. Nah, raw copies are 20, 9.8, 165. I put this one as steady and worth it. Because everything's so close. You could call it I'll Be Back if you wanted to. It's right. It's borderline. But yeah, really, all it did was the movie did here in the last couple of weeks is put it back where it was at the trailer and didn't really push it any higher at all. Next and last, we have Ultimate Fallout 4. First appearance of Miles Morales. This is the main cover. Interesting enough, this was on the list also a couple weeks ago. It was on the list. The second part was on the list like last week. But yeah, so what did Miles do? How big did Miles jump with the new movie? Back then, the trailer, raw copies jumped back to 5 to 700 raw, 9.8, 19 to 2100 for 9.8 back then, after it had dropped down to about 15, occasionally all the way down to like 12 before that. Now raw copies are 4 to 600, which is down a little bit. 9.8s are 16 to 2000, which is down a little bit. So this book actually, and even now that we're a couple weeks after the movie, which means we should have gotten a full peak, just got back to where it was, if not slightly below where it was with the trailer. There's a lot of these, but that seems to be a pattern with all of these. The movie hype is not going as high. I think people are starting to realize not to buy at the movie or the trailer a little bit more than they used to. I mean, still obviously people that do it, or still lots of sales, but yeah, it did not enough sales to really push the number on this book any higher. So that's this week's list. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.